you have a great new year, and hopefully 2021 is a little bit better. We can only hope. At this point, if you ever witness me make a prediction, just bet against me. Every time, for your own sake. At this point, 2021 is more than underway, but I would be remiss, I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I were to skip my favourite annual video, which is counting down the best albums of the year prior, in this case 2020. But before we get into that, two quick things. One, there's a poll down in the description that I'm running until the end of the month to gauge what ranked videos you want to see in 2021, so go do that whenever you get the chance. And second of all, there are some tough cuts for this list, so before we get into the list proper, here are 10 brilliant albums that could only just be honourable mentions. I'm sorry.
Can't do it hard. Can't do it hard. Can't do it hard. Can't do it hard.
I do what I wanna do when I wanna do it. But you got the bags to prove it. Hips to move it around and make shapes, yes.
Try and catch me tying up loose ends. I'm past that, now I wanna fuck all my friends. No patience, sick of being stuck in the end.
Sorry, bro, I love you. Sorry, bro, I love you. I can't stop thinking of you. Sorry, bro, I love you.
And with those honourable mentions out of the way, let's get into the 25 best albums of 2020, starting with...
Ever since my brother died, ever since my brother died, I've been thinking about hummus.
I found the immediate vitriol towards this album just so laughable. Is 2020 just frazzled everyone's brains to the point that they forgot what Die Lit's reaction was initially like. People just seemed to laugh it off, myself included, before ultimately it's become a cult classic of sorts. Playboi Carti just makes songs that take days, weeks, sometimes months to finally unravel and show their true appeal, and Whole Lotta Red is just chock full of them. It's not as if punk hasn't been integral to hip hop as a whole and vice versa, but what Whole Lotta Red means to this current wave of trap music feels unique and fresh, from the inflections to the production that veers between noise rock and gothic spectacle. I'm willing to bet that my admiration of Whole Lotta Red is only going to grow and grow as I come to terms with its jagged edges and rockstar personality.
Well, this mad world made me crazy. Might just turn around to 180.
While I expected this album to be more of a mainstay in my 2020 listening habits, as well as higher up on this list, I've had over a year to really sit with Circles and come to a solid opinion on it, and yeah, a year later I'm still very much captivated by this album. While I do find the sudden 180 by some listeners after Swimming to be a bit odd, considering these two records aren't exactly worlds apart, the lyrical nature of Circles, how it paints this picture of Mac during his final years, all the highs and anxious lows, backed up by some of his most enthralling production choices to date, makes this the strongest out of this duo, and an album that few albums from 2020 could resonate with me more than. I don't put my best songs or album of the year list out in December, mainly because I've got a laundry list of releases to catch up on, else I end up just ignoring them, and then days, weeks, months, years later I find this really cool album from a year that I totally skipped by and I just feel like I need to. Case in point, What's Your Pleasure, an album that I got around to at the tail end of 2020, and there's not a whole lot I can add to the conversation about this album other than that I'm glad there's a slip-proof mat in my bath, because I definitely would have broken every bone in my body from lip syncing to the title track and Ooh La La alone. 2020 was a year of comebacks, some of which we'll be getting into momentarily, but if one return out of them all felt the most needed and urgent, then it had to be Deftones. Much like they did in 2016 with Gore, their presence during a messy time couldn't have been more apt, but this time around the music they're flaunting is so much more satisfying. I know it's often overused, but Ohms is apocalyptic, from the majestic, intimidating soundscapes to the imagery which draws from disasters both past and present. It really does embody that age-old quote about people who forget their past being doomed to repeat it, and Deftones are happy to bellow that over these intense, gratifying backdrops adorned in decay and filth. Great timing, boys. I can see Gathering Swans being one of, if not the most underappreciated album on this list, which is a crying shame because I just know so many people watching this video would get such a kick out of it. While it's tempting to label this album as Listen to the Smiths, but if Morrissey wasn't a complete and utter prick, I wouldn't want to play down what Choirboy are doing as nostalgia bait. What they craft on here does owe a lot to the 80s wave of new romantic and jangle pop, but Gathering Swans feels more of a repurposing than recycling, using these palettes to spin some intriguing tales about bitterness and masculinity. It also helps that Adam Klopp's pipes are some of the most fascinating you'll find in music at the moment. A lot of 2020 felt like you were chasing remnants of normality. Zoom calls to make up for the time you would have spent socialising, watching movie after movie on Netflix to make up for cinemas being closed, you know, stuff like that. Whenever I had the blues about not going to any gigs in 2020, which was quite often, I would regularly find myself listening to Dogleg, and if I squint my eyes just enough whenever listening to a song like Fox or Kawasaki Backflip, I can see that can of red stripe fly across the room. I can feel myself getting chucked around the crowd as the sonic boom of the venue speakers melt my face off. What I would give to experience that just now.
Only one at the top, it can get so long when you're the only one.
I wasn't expecting to lay around in my pants for most of summer 2020, and I also wasn't expecting to listen to and enjoy a Blade album. It's been a long, exhausting journey trying to see what others do in his music, but with Triple Free, that long-awaited breakthrough has finally happened. Blade has, for me anyway, finally channeled the emotional potency and versatility of his peers that makes Triple Free an album I'm on board with for more than just the production. Whether it be trying to reassure his partner on Don't Worry, or begging said partner to see the beauty that he does, the beats on here are often beautiful, but don't mistake Triple Free as just a pretty face.
Only the strong survive. Only the strong survive.
And the award for album I had the most fun listening to while having Genius open goes to this new Laura Marlin LP. And while I have enjoyed a fair amount of her work in the past, when it comes to concept and execution, she's really outdone herself here. Granted, I can't say it was something that clicked with me right away, but hey, that's why you're supposed to listen to something more than once before you talk so definitively about it. The more I've returned to Song for Our Daughter, though, the stronger its personality and charm have become. Acting as a collection of stories and fables for a future daughter, Laura does a great job pulling from history and personal experiences to create one of the most sincere listens of 2020, equal parts heartbreaking as it is heartwarming.
Should've been cool, but dude got screwed up, his shit got burned up, so he fucked her up and she turned big. I got chewed up, that shit fucked me up, so I'ma fuck you up.
It's easy to lose sight of who these artists that we listen to so often actually are. They might give you insight and guidance that really does help you, but at the end of the day they are people, they are just stumbling through life like you and I, and this is something that Open Mike Eagle addresses in a way that I find so much more rewarding and reassuring than any sort of life-changing advice someone could offer me. Following the breakdown of his marriage and other unfortunate events in his life, Anime, Trauma and Divorce is a portrait of a man trying to pick up the pieces and make sense of what the hell is going on. It can be like Everything Ends Last Year, where he's reflective but exhausted, or the handful of songs where Mike tries to strengthen himself with the titular Anime, but at no point does it ever feel like he has all the answers. Everything isn't perfect and salvaged by the end, but it is better. Sometimes that progress is more important than the perfection that you're aiming for, and I just really do thank Open Mike Eagle for being able to embody that with this very record. You could give this new Best record a surface listen and just assume it's more of the same, but you couldn't be more wrong. Sure, it's still got that same great power pop styling that made their debut such a blast, but lyrically it focuses less on the self and more on relationships, uncertainty and anxiety that surrounds them, both platonic and romantic. This leads to tracks like Out of Sight, my favourite of the lot, that jumps from shoegaze to Midwest emo, all without sacrificing Liz's sardonic lyrics. The slower cuts like the title track show that the band don't operate effectively on just one level, and when it comes to what you're expecting from them, tunes like Acrid show that the Beth's formula isn't close to wearing thin. Ironically enough, I'm going to keep my analysis of this 3-hour long album pretty brief, and I do think Charm's duration could put off a lot of people. If I was to bring in a party metaphor, it's the kind of people who want their parties to be sporadic and intense and something that they have trouble remembering the following day. Then there'll be those like myself who want their parties to progress rather than prematurely go off with a bang. You want to soak in the conversation and anticipate whatever the playlist is about to offer you. Charmed is a record all about relishing in those good times for as long as you can, and in a year noticeably void of said good times, it's nice to know there's a celebration and a party that you can come back to at the click of a button. In 2016, Touche Amore released Stage 4, an album that helped many, including myself, come to terms with some unaddressed grief, in addition to introducing some of the best sounding post-hardcore music of the 21st century. Their latest album, Lament, is an epilogue of sorts, frontman Jeremy Bolm coming to terms with what's happened now that he's spilt so much of his feelings on full public display. There are moments of vengeance and bitterness, but Lament is ultimately a record about perseverance, leaving yourself reminded of all the good that's happened so you can wade through the bad, and addressing those crippling lows. It can be a challenging listening, and honestly it can be a little bit overwhelming depending on your state of mind while listening to it, but if Lament is anything, it's touching and it's real. If you find yourself in need of a shoulder to cry on or a pillow to scream into, then this is a worthy nominee. My biggest pet peeve when it comes to music criticism is when reviewers will just spend most of their time making comparisons instead of any meaningful analysis. Anyway, it's time for me to make some comparisons instead of any meaningful analysis. Pixel Bath feels like a very Liam Core album when you break it down to influences and similarities. George Clinton chillwave, Young Fellers-esque art pop and electronica, as well as the spirit of American Boyfriend by Kevin Abstract, all spring to mind. While that does factor into my enjoyment somewhat, Pixel Bath isn't just a copycat project that pulls at my nostalgia, as Gene Dawson does a brilliant job capturing that youthful, reckless abandon in a mason jar. A lot of the lyrics, especially like the ones on the song Pegasus, come across as somebody just trying to make sense of their place in the world, and with the summer vibes that the album gives off, it feels like the soundtrack to an unreleased A24 coming of age film, and I do mean that in a really positive way. Before the release of Brave Faces Everyone, Spanish Love Songs did put out a reading list full of organisations that correspond to specific songs, which should give you some awareness into how heavy some of these songs can be. You have Self-Destruction, which captures the drowning sensation of chasing your dreams while being tied down with a financial anchor. Generation Lost was a pretty powerful one, touching on what feels like a pretty contemporary loop of alcohol and drug abuse to deal with current circumstances that never seem to be tackled. The imagery used here is often pretty agonising due to how realistic or even relatable it ends up being. While released in February, long before the reality of the pandemic affected most of us, the gap in wealth and other social ills becoming more present since makes this emo record full of late stage capitalism critique hit all the harder. While no less miserable, the title track does end the album on an optimistic message. It's easy to feel hopeless. If anything, with everything that's going on, you should feel hopeless, but things will get better. Brave Faces Everyone. Yeah, a stunning, albeit heart-wrenching finale to a stunning, albeit heart-wrenching album.
Shamika said I had potential.
There's always one album each year that gets smothered in critic kisses and praised to high heavens, and in 2020 it was Fetch the Bolt Cutters. However, unlike this album, or God forbid this album. Fiona Apple's buzz was much deserved. I wasn't sure what to expect going into Fetch the Bolt Cutters, but a record that slowly comes apart up in the uncomfortableness of it all, with conventional instrumentation thrown off kilter enough to make you feel like something isn't quite right, and lyrics that are so raw you might catch salmonella. Yeah, it wasn't in my notes, but I'm pleased with what we got, if a bit uneasy from it all. Much like the natural disasters that it name drops at points, Fetch the Bolt Cutters has came out of nowhere to leave a path of destruction in its wake, and said destruction is mostly the towering high expectations that so many people had for it, but I think it does speak to the strength of this album that despite all this anticipation and all the expectations, Fetch the Bolt Cutters has still managed to come out on top and leave most people pretty elated and happy with what we got. A really strong album that was definitely worth the wait. It would have been a little bit odd for Jeff Rosenstock to skip 2020. Both Worry and Post dropped during two of the most tumultuous times of the 2010s, so it only made sense that last year would see our pop punk dad bless us with his presence. No Dream isn't a total reinvention of the Jeff Rosenstock formula, but just because an act isn't doing a complete 180 doesn't mean they should be knocked down a peg for it. This is a record that has all the adrenaline and rage of an exorcism, with lyrics that range from political commentary to random Airbnb stories to refreshing tangents about mental health. Sometimes that's all you need, and for me it absolutely was. We all love a good comeback story, whether it be a football team on the brink of losing coming back to win the whole thing, an underdog overcoming all the obstacles in his way to come out on top, and in the case of The New Abnormal, a much beloved noughties act managing to come out after a 7-year-long hiatus with their best album since their debut, surprising pretty much everybody. Initially I thought my enjoyment of this album just came down to absence makes the heart grow fonder, but as 2020 went on I realised, no, The New Abnormal really is a genuinely well crafted, exciting album regardless of the weight that preceded it, not lacking in the hit or miss ambition of 2013's Come Down Machine, nor the post-punk perfection of Is This It or Room on Fire. The New Abnormal is similar to In Rainbows in that while it's not a radical reinvention of a band's sound, it is a compilation of all their finest elements to create something inspired but no less remarkable. Whether I'm coming back for the peculiar Usher-esque At the Door, or the 80s homage anthem Bad Decisions, or the fantastic falsetto heavy Eternal Summer, it's apparent that The New Abnormal is so full chock of hits. I'm never just checking in for 1 or 2 nights, I'm in it for the whole 9-day bender. I knew a new Phoebe Bridgers project was on the way, but I never could have anticipated this huge leap in terms of production, and I know I should have been keeping my eye on the collaborations with Boy Genius and frontman of Bright Eyes, Conor Oberst, to know that this wasn't going to be a copy and paste job, but Punisher really does do a great job to circumvent any claims that this is some sort of sophomore slump. There's so much good to be found in this record. There's the propelling indie AJJ-esque anthem Kyoto, the Elliott Smith nods that never go overboard into tasteless idol worship, exploring said idol worship in the title track, and that's without me even mentioning Chinese Satellite that never fails to have the hairs in the back of my neck standing upright, or I Know the End, which has the same effect turned up to 11. It's been a slow burner, but Punisher seems set to stay with me for years to come. It's a daunting challenge on its own to make a debut album worth somebody's time, but to have the tenacity to rock in and just try whatever flavour of music that you want to on a whim, that seems like a car crash waiting to happen, doesn't it? Yet, what Come and Have a Go have produced with Heart Failure is the furthest thing from a tragedy. While there are tender brushstrokes here or there to add some layers to the whole affair, Heart Failure mainly concerns itself with keeping you on your toes with flourishes of EDM, glitch pop, synth-funk, and so much more that you best keep an eye on your old ticker. The fact the duo do these sounds so much justice may be enough to send you to the cardio unit, but rest assured, I'll be in the same ward as you, cutting shapes to Playboy.
Get the cash and then to spend it. Love is smash and color passes. I'm taking fuck the fashion. vicious. I wanna run up with a pump to blast it up the jacket.
There's music to soundtrack you cowering in the corner of a dark room, too afraid to move, and then there's music that brushes off that fear and fills you with the adrenaline needed to dash through the unseen to turn the light on. God Has Nothing to Do With It is the latter. It's a pretty compact listen, one of the shortest records on this list, but I'm going to assume that Backwash did this intentionally so you didn't get too accustomed to the intimidating soundscapes that make up this album, shifting it every few minutes to keep you on your toes like some sort of roguelike game. No track overstays its welcome, and better yet is a sprinkling of enlightenment and hope that helps avoid this album becoming overwhelmingly cynical or antagonistic. It's kind of like having somebody hold your head underwater but having the relief of coming back up for air here and there, except I mean that in a good way.
What a dream that was. I almost couldn't wake because
This is the third year in a row that Adrienne Lenker's featured on my album of the year list, and at this point I feel it's impossible for her to ever falter. Her ability to put me in a trance with the simplest of tools quite often put me in a spin with her quivering vocals and strumming alone, makes me feel like a child witnessing magic tricks for the first time. Just how are you accomplishing this? Unlike magic tricks, illusions, once I identify every cog in Adrienne Lenker's songwriting, I don't find myself any less impressed. If anything, it's the opposite. I find myself even more in awe. And when you sprinkle in some of the most heartfelt poetry around just now, in addition to the loving arrangements that I've been discussing, yeah, I don't find myself hard pressed to say that the bar for singer-songwriter albums in the 2020s has been set incredibly high by Adrienne Lenker.
Liquid knives, cheek the price, live like no tomorrow. I'm a slide, let it ride, get a chance to spot though.
I remember listening to Young Lean for the first time back when I was 16 and being blown away by his rendition of Cloud Rap, a movement I didn't expect to stay around for long, but one I was obsessed with nonetheless. Fast forward 7 years and my track record of poor predictions has once again bit me in the arse, because not only is Young Lean still a prominent figure in music, he's making the best music of his nearly decade-long career at this point. Lean's fourth record effectively serves as a Sonic Generations of sorts, assembling all of the assets and elements that make Lean Doer such a fascinating artist and melting them into one Cloud Rap cauldron. The industrial assertiveness of Warlord, the auto-tune crooning of Stranger, and an ear for infectious and hypnotic hooks that's been on display throughout his entire career. Stars is that good that it's had me scouring the internet for cheap crates of Arizona iced tea. Just call me Young Liam. Thank you. While you wouldn't be in the wrong for calling How I'm Feeling Now the first Quarantine album, I do feel it's a bit dismissive to regard it as such, as if that's like the novelty factor of it. I mean, sure, Click 2.0 does like directly address this longing to meet your pals during the pandemic, but I feel like How I'm Feeling Now is more of an exploration of the human condition during any sort of kind of struggle, as opposed to just one in general, which helps to make it feel like so much more of just a fully fleshed experience for me. Whether it be the anxiety and fear that those who you trust more than anything in turn can hurt you the most, breaking down profound romantic feelings to their most basic essential elements to let someone know how you truly feel when time feels like it could run out at any moment, or just how eager you are for camaraderie and catharsis, Charli XCX has put out what is easily her most sentimental album, and one that gives pop to a serious challenge to the hyperpop throne. Now we're into the top two, and at this point you're probably expecting like a curveball. You'd expect me to choose an album that you only have like a fleeting knowledge of, that you saw at a glance on like a quietist list, or somebody that's only got like less than 1,000 plays on Spotify, something like that. It's not as if The Weeknd hasn't put out a release that sees him indulge in all of his vices, ride all the highs and lows to come out with some new perspective, but After Hours is easily the most polished, daring and satisfying attempt he's made with this concept in mind. Despite The Weeknd shifting the goalposts time and time again throughout the 2010s when it comes to what pop music sounds like, After Hours is chock full of surprises that don't rely solely on shock value. You've got your delightful 80s throwbacks like Save Your Tears and In Your Eyes, glitzy synth pop perfection in the form of Blinding Lights, and the title track, which goes in an unprecedented future garage direction for Abel. It all mirrors The Weeknd's erratic mindset as he processes his place in the world, the toxic habits he plays into when he starts to feel aimless, and more than a few romantic tales that he sells like he's on Saul Goodman form. Yeah, the Grammys might have snubbed him, but The Weeknd can be happy knowing that some random Scottish man with a small YouTube channel has chose After Hours as the second best album of 2020. As I get older, I find myself putting labels on years so I can better understand them and see how the music at the time fitted into all of it. I look at 2014 and 2015, 2 years that were all about change and inner struggle for me, and with albums like Home Like No Place Is There and To Pimp a Butterfly releasing, that made total sense. 2016 could only be labelled as messy, and so too was the music of that year, a bizarre array of every possible sound I could want or need. You may expect me to use a word like hectic or depressing to kind of like really define the central theme of 2020, but for me it was reflective, with you having to spend so much time inside your house with just kind of like there's sometimes not much to do, especially if you found yourself on furlough. You kind of just were reflecting on your current situation, reflecting what's happening in the world, what kind of happened to get to this point in life, especially when it came to looking at everything that was going on in society with like decades and decades of oppression and bad decisions ultimately leading to just kind of vitriol and anger, much deserved movements like Black Lives Matter really kind of just showing all this grievance coming to the surface. It was a year of just looking back and reflecting, and so when it came to choosing my album of the year, it was an artist who also did a lot of reflecting, looked back at years and decades of rock music to see if he could build something good, if not better, on top of it all. Yeah, I really couldn't choose any other album than this for my best album of 2020. I find it weirdly perfect that reflective is a word I've gone for, and I have two reasons for that. The first is that up until December, when I started to draft together this list, Heaven to a Tortured Mind wasn't the frontrunner to win this title. It was mainly between After Hours and How I'm Feeling Now, but as I kept coming back to it, as I continued to reflect, it felt like I'd come across a book that I'd read before but now found some chapters that I initially skimmed past. The second reason I find reflective such a funny descriptor is just how perfect it is to describe this rock odyssey. I went to as many gigs in 2020 that I could count them on Abe's foot, but I really do feel like I got my year's worth thanks to Heaven to a Tortured Mind. It has this just reflective, shimmering magic that only a live setting can offer. You've got the lush, sultry musings on romanticism that shimmer across the stage, the otherworldly transition from that song into Dream Palette that feels like Yves Tumor's trial for testing out how much of a pulverising a venue's sound system can take. Then there's Kerosene, the mind-melting jam you'd be too scared to spread on your granny's toast in case it disintegrates her on the spot. That's all on offer if you manage to survive Yves Tumor's first trial. Listen to Opener Gospel for a New Century without looping it. The piles of skulls and skeleton hands fixed into devil horns will tell you this is a challenge failed by many. Yves Tumor could have easily just crafted a sequel to Safe in the Hands of Love that would have acted as like an unnerving, horror-ish soundtrack to 2020, but instead they decided to give us one of the most profound, exciting, and just great psychedelic rock albums I've ever heard in all of my life. And that is why I'm giving Yves Tumor the title of Best Album of 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, then I'd appreciate it if you gave it a like or even considered subscribing. Both are very much appreciated, and something else that's appreciated is all my wonderful patrons that are on screen just now who support this content over on Patreon. £1 gets you early access to every video that I put out, and £3 gets your name on screen just now. So yeah, if you like me enough, I would appreciate the support, but yep, you patrons are amazing. Love yous lots. I'll catch you all in the next video, but until then, as always, take care, and I really do mean it this time after that intro, stay safe and stay hydrated.